with Halliburton that became worth approximately $30 million when Halliburton's stock went up during the war. True, but you can actually find the thing online if you just do a little Google, where it shows his and Lynn Cheney's little signed statement turning those stock options over to a charity. So he benefited zero from that. He became a true believer. So I don't think the way to understand Cheney's actions is with his making money. I know people who knew him back when he wanted not to invade Baghdad when he was Secretary of Defense under the first George Bush. And people who knew him say, he's a different man. He really changed. I think power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, as Lord Acton said. The other thing Lord Acton said that was almost in the same paragraph is great men are almost always bad men. That if you become great, you're probably bad. Because of the way we define great. Right? I bet you there are a lot of people in this room who could be great people in my sense. I hope. But if you are, you're not going to be thought of as great in the world of general. Right? There was a question I had over here. Yes.
You also believe that people like Wolfowitz are true believers too? He has the whole Wolfowitz doctrine, spreading liberal democracy through the military. I
do. I think Wolfowitz is a good example. Now, there is that famous line that I think economist Brad DeLong has used in his blog once in a while, the economist here at Berkeley. Something like, it's very hard to I've forgotten who had the original line. He quotes the original person. It's very hard to persuade someone of something when his whole income depends on his not being persuaded. And so it gets back to my foreign policy establishment thing. I think these people come in at a relatively young age and are idealistic, and they have certain ideals, and they push them, and then they find, as if by an invisible hand, that they make money with these ideals, and then it's kind of hard to shift. Yes?
Along the economic axis, would it be fair to argue that getting into the nature of war is that rhetorically we have to have this sense of belief and righteousness as just in order to kill somebody you have to believe you're righteous and they're evil. It's sort of part of the deal.
Yes.
And as a result of this, we may think of the government in a way of correcting evil, like as a utilitarian function. Mm-hmm. And that may reflect domestically in some sense. Like we get thinking that the crusade for against childhood poverty, for example, is like this war. That is sort of like metaphorically parallel to the idea of going to another country and fighting evil.
I think that's right, and that's been President Carter had, when he had his energy policy, he talked about the moral equivalent of war, which of course people made it an acronym, MEOW. But the war on poverty under Johnson, the war on drugs under Nixon and then Reagan, so there's a lot of that. And there's just this incredible trust of government. And I would just say to you, if you're a libertarian, you probably already agree with me. If you're not, there's a good chance you don't. But, really try to look at government and just with no blinkers, just what does government do? Whether it be the local cop or the head of some agency, and just really what are they doing? And some of the people I know who became libertarians in Washington, there was one friend in particular, Ivan Eland, who writes for antiwar.com. I asked him, how did you become a libertarian? He said, I worked for the GAO for a number of years, and we studied programs, and every single program we studied failed. And nothing was changed. And so, I used to have this line, and it kind of gets back to your question. I used to have this line, well, we need government to have police forces and courts. I've actually sat in some courtrooms. Fortunately, I wasn't charged, but a friend of mine was. It's pretty scary. It's pretty scary, the kinds of evidence they have, what they'll do, what happens to you if you don't have a lot of money to hire a lawyer, and so on. And it's the way I think of government, actually, is government is like a bully, where it's going to look for the weak and go after them. And I'm not saying that's all of it, that's most of government. Every once in a while there's a good government person, but most of government is that. about, what, 5 minutes or something, if you want.
Is there any last questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I mentioned just briefly earlier that I think that a lot of people our age, and libertarians too, the reason that we're not so, why we don't wear the banner of anti-war as much as libertarians might have in previous generations is that there hasn't been any real threat of a draft. And as much as getting a certain percentage of your paycheck taken away to be wasted on these destructive wars, it's not nearly as tangible as you might have to go carry a gun and get shot at. So do you think that it might, I mean, hopefully there will not be a prospect of another draft in our lifetime, but how can we try to communicate to people something, is there anything more tangible that we can communicate to people our age to get them behind the anti-war?
Well, I guess when you say tangible, I'm not sure, because again, it's happening over there, wherever there is. I would just say, attend talks like this, give talks like this. You can probably just, you know, based on various bits of information, write letters to editors and write op-eds and so on. You have to start somewhere. And so, and by the way, just to put some perspective on it, I didn't live in the United States when the Vietnam War was going on. I moved here from Canada in September of '72, so it was pretty much winding down. But my sense of it, when I came down a couple of times between '69 and '72, was libertarians were not that actively involved in the anti-war movement. There were a few pockets here and there. So actually, I think libertarians, believe it or not, are doing better on this one than they were in the Vietnam War. I think. Not positive, because I wasn't around, but I think that that's true. Where libertarians really led in the late '60s was to get rid of the draft. And they had a big, especially libertarian economists like Milton Friedman had a big role in that.
Well, if there isn't any more questions, thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
And before everyone goes off, I just want to encourage you all to attend our general meetings.